Good morning, good day, and good evening to all our attendees joining us for today's latest Data Science Central webinar. I'd like to start our event off today by thanking Tableau for sponsoring today's webinar. As many of you may already know, Tableau is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community and a wonderful partner, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our webinar today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including MapR, Teradata, TIBCO, Hortonworks, and Pivotal, as well as Cisco, to name just a few. These past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you have not had the opportunity to view them, I would encourage you to do so, as they do provide some very useful information. Today's webinar is entitled How United Way Embraces Data Visualization to Drive Social Impact. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be 1 hour long. We have a single presenter that I will introduce to all of you in just a few moments. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being taped and will be made available later on this afternoon at datasciencecentral.com. I'd also like to encourage all our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We will be reviewing them and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. My name is Tim Madison. I'm one of the co-founders of Data Science Central, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, India Swearingen of United Way of the Bay Area. India is the Director of Evaluation and has many years of industry experience focusing on optimization of data and evaluation to enhance social change, such as community and housing redevelopment, and educational achievement programs and incentives. As the Director of Evaluation and Insight at the United Way, India helps to ensure department and overall organizational goals are aligned and that data are seamlessly integrated into archiving organizational and community key outcomes. She has an MA in Applied Social Psychology and Program Evaluation. Thanks for being with us this morning, India. We're looking forward to your presentation. United Way has set a goal to cut poverty in half by the year 2020. To achieve this, they are collaborating with local agencies, governments, and corporations. This means dealing with disparate data from a range of sources to monitor change, track key indicators, and facilitate discovery of patterns and trends leading to new insight. In today's webinar, we will demonstrate how United Way uses data visualization to measure progress, empower collaboration, and support decision-making across a broad audience, highlighting how the United Way empowers a truly data-driven culture, creatively connects disparate, sometimes messy information in one place, and builds various non-techie dashboards to support various projects. So India, as soon as you're ready to go, I'll let you take over.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tim. Thank you all for joining us. So as Tim stated, my name is India Swearingen. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Insights at United Way of the Bay Area, and I am the Director of Evaluation in a small team, a team of one, as some of you guys might be able to relate to, and I do anything related to program evaluation, data metrics, research, and basically I love data. But today I want to talk to you all about how United Way embraces data visualization to drive social impact. And before we get started, I want to go over a few things that I hope that you guys will walk away from after this presentation. And the first thing is understanding the process of how we drove metrics within our organization and the different phases that we had to go through. And then also giving you guys some visualization, some reports for inspiration to walk away with, maybe you can take back to your company or organization. And then lastly, some lessons learned. We learned a lot of things throughout this past couple of years in using Tableau and developing visualizations. So without further ado, let's get started. So many of you guys working in the social sector have seen, or just in companies in general, have seen that there are kind of two types of data environments. And the first one being a less ideal data environment. And real quickly, what this looks like is you have an organization or you have a data system where there's only a partial view of what's actually happening in the organization. You may not know how many you've served or what the true impact is. Or you might be using disparate data systems where you have some data here, some data living in this document, some in an Excel spreadsheet. It's all over the place, and it's really hard to kind of see the complete picture when you have different things living in different places. Or you have inconsistent reporting. So what this might look like is you might go to one person in the organization and get one number, and you see another number somewhere else, and the organization as a whole isn't really telling the same story. Or the data is just non-accessible. No one knows where to find it other than the people who are responsible for collecting the data. No one knows how to find it, it's difficult. It's in a difficult format or tool to use. On the opposite end of that is a more ideal data environment. And what this might look like is you have data that's visually representative, so it tells a story. People can understand what's actually happening. And it might inspire change, too. You have a dashboard or something that tells people what the issue areas are and what they need to do to take action. It's easy to use. It's accessible. A lot of your data users and champions are going to be people who may not be data savvy. And so you create tools for things and visualizations for them to really understand and comprehend without having a heavy data background. And then there's coordinated efforts, and this one is really, really important, and I'll go into this a little bit more in detail later, but it's about getting people to work together across the organization. Yeah, you have your data experts, but really having people be champions of that data, working together, kind of telling the story, pulling the data, doing all the different, getting the information out, being ambassadors of it. That's one of the biggest things that you'll see. However, there are many challenges that we all experience, whether or not you're in a for-profit or a nonprofit organization. And the first one is systems issues, and that's having data in many places and not knowing where to find it or how to bring it together, having little money or resources to do it. You might be working in a small team of one, like myself, or you may not have the tools or technology to support a platform that streamlines all of this data. Building accountability is also a challenge. Especially in the social sector, you want to build transparency. You want people to understand what's actually happening. And you want the data not just to be a pretty visual, but something that can drive decision-making within the organization. So kind of getting other folks to leverage that. And then the last big challenge, is creating a culture. So once you have all of these different tools and systems in place, creating a culture where the tools that people are using are quick, simple, easy to find, and people are regularly using them, and people are regularly engaged in the insight. So specifically, I want to talk about some of these challenges in regards to United Way of the Bay Area. So some of you guys might be familiar with the United Way brand, but for those of you who are less familiar, United Way of the Bay Area is part of a large network called United Way, ranging from United Way of California, United Way Worldwide, United Way of America, and this particular, and all of those organizations, all of these organizations are focused on education, income, and health, and bringing people from different organizations and across the community to address poverty. United Way of the Bay Area specifically focuses on, we're based in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and we specifically focus on issues in the Bay Area, and we have a goal of cutting poverty in half. So all of our programs and our initiatives are under the umbrella of education, income, and basic needs. And United Way of the Bay Area, as far as this kind of our roadmap to where we're at as far as being data savvy, we kind of sit closer to the ideal data environment, though we still have some challenges that we're trying to accomplish and working towards to be at that truly, data-driven, very ideal data environment. So I want to get more into that, but I want to also show you guys some of the things that we've done in our mission to cut poverty. So a little bit more about United Way. We have 4 core strategies, and I'm giving you guys this so you can kind of understand where we're pulling the data from and how we're using the data and what our initiatives are that we're trying to address. So we have our Rise Together Collective Impact movement, which is bringing together, United Way is the backbone for that, and we're bringing together organizations and agencies in the community to address poverty, address this goal of cutting poverty in half by 2020. We also have our 5 core systems changing programs, like our call center that people can call in and get information about services in the area. It's kind of like 411, but it's 211. And our workforce development youth programs. Those are 2 examples. We also have our policy and advocacy work. This is kind of getting things on the ballot, pushing for legislation, really just getting systemic changes. And then lastly, our civic engagement and social movements, such as volunteerism, getting people out there. And so here are some examples in the last few months of some of the visualizations we built in Tableau to accomplish some of these goals. So this is our self-sufficiency standard, that it's interactive. Folks can hover above different counties in the Bay Area and see things like who's living below self-sufficiency. Another example is our community data library, which has things like who's enrolled in free or reduced lunch at the school and across California compared to California and the Bay Area as a whole, and it's interactive as well. And then the minimum wage, this was something when we got out the votes, we were trying to get folks to, or get minimum wage passed in San Francisco and Oakland, so we built some charts in Tableau to kind of really visualize what that need was. And then lastly, our Workforce Youth Development Program called MatchBridge Summer Jobs Plus. This is a kind of a tracking tool that they built to understand who was coming in and where the youth were being referred to. So these are just some examples of how we leveraged, these are all done in Tableau, to kind of address some of those things, to kind of showcase some of that work and some of the impact. And so, but to get there, to get where we're at now, it was a phased approach. It was a journey for us. And I want to walk you guys through some of the challenges we had, some of the things we accomplished. And so as an overview, here is some of the 4 phases I would highlight as far as our journey. And the first one being building data champions. And what this means is getting a group of folks across the organization to be energized and inspired by data, to be ambassadors in the community and to really push forward some of these insights and take ownership of it. The second one is phase 2 is testing out visualizations. So sometimes this means just putting things out there, seeing if it works, seeing how people react to them, and rebuilding if they don't. The third phase I'll walk through is finding ways to leverage data. So once you have these great visualizations, getting folks to actually leverage them in different ways. And then lastly, and most importantly, I would say, is building sustainability. So once you have all these great tools, making sure that they're sustainable, they're ongoing, someone is there to update them if need be, or to make them more relevant if the goals or the mission changes. So let's take a journey. Let's go to that first phase, these little cars driving down this road. So the first phase is, as I mentioned before, is building data champions, building people across the organization, getting people inspired about data and visualizations. As I mentioned earlier, I am in a department of 1. So, the challenge of that is, whether or not, you try to take ownership and you try to do everything yourselves, or you get people inspired, you give them the tools that they need to do analysis, to develop out these quick and simple, easy visualizations, and to really, promote some of their work and to drive insight. And usually in many organizations, you have really two options. Most of us are not, unless you're like a Facebook or Google and you have a huge data team that's just responsible for doing big data, metrics running, building, doing things with machine learning. You have really two options, and one is command and control. So that's you have centralized data. You have someone who's responsible for doing all of the analysis and the metrics and pushing it out to different departments, like your marketing department or program staff or your finance department. The other option, and the one that worked for us, is having a shared network of folks. So you have that central person really just providing the data and support to all of these different teams, and you're providing the teams with the tools to really drive that insight and really be the change leaders within their department, within their area, and across the organization. So I noticed some of you guys, a real quick pause, some of you guys might be having some trouble with the visuals. It depends on, this is all done through Prezi, and I think we'll be sharing this out afterwards if you're having trouble with your network system. So depending on the speed of your network, it might be showing up a little slow, or you might get a black screen. So the second phase is, okay, oh it is, okay.
Yeah, don't worry about the question.
Okay. The second phase is launching visualizations. So now you have these teams, you have all of these people that are really energized about using data. They want to use it in their work. They're, might be working in the marketing team or your, development team, grants team, responsible for bringing in, funding, and you're giving them this inspiration for change. Now the second phase is really just building out visualizations that work. And what that involves is really working with folks to kind of test out some things, seeing if it's the information that they need and in the format that they need it in. One example that I'm showing you guys up on the screen right now is from one of our core system changing programs, which is our SparkPoint program. And this has the one-stop model of bringing all these agencies and organizations together in a central center or location to provide services to low-income folks in the community. And we have a variety of SparkPoint centers, so there's a lot of different agencies in a lot of different regions coming together to enter in their data and track metrics across all of these, a set of outcomes. And so you can see here we created a column for impact. So what is the impact that the program's having each year? How many people are serving? How many people are being served? How many are achieving short-term and long-term outcomes? And then also the participants. Who are they? They're primarily really low-income folks that are coming in. They have mid to average credit score. They're predominantly Latino and African Americans. So really understanding who the program's serving. And then the last one is engagement. How is the program pushing forward? And then the looking ahead, what is the program targeting going forward? So what are the program staff and the agencies, the partner agencies that they work with targeting going forward, so people across the organization can really leverage this and understand and say, oh, okay, now I get what SparkPoint is doing, or people in the community can really understand what the impact of SparkPoint is. And we have these for all of our core programs in the same format, but with a different focus, the same impact, participants, and engagement, so with a different focus depending on what the goal of the program is. And then the neat thing about this is that they're interactive. So all of these things you can hover above the points and really see kind of like a description of what they are, but then this other interactive piece is having these filters. So you can see previous years. We filtered in all the data from prior years. So this is that accessibility, making it easy to use for folks. Now I don't have to look at a bunch of different spreadsheets or all of these different reports, in all these different places to really see how that changed in the previous years. I have it all in one place. And then also I can see if by county, maybe I am just interested in what's happening in Alameda County or San Francisco. I can filter down and see what the impact is there. But to get here, this was a long process. And I don't mean it was long because it took a while to build it. Tableau was super easy to use. It was super easy to create these visualizations each time. The difficult part was getting people to agree upon a set of metrics that were important and putting it in a format that people could inspire, change and inspire understanding of what was happening and getting people to kind of communicate that and have one message. So that was a challenge. And here's the example you see in front of the screen is kind of one of the early examples of what this same dashboard looked like. And as you can see, there's a lot of text in here. There's a lot of really great, rich information. But one of the things that this is lacking is that, it's not interactive. It's hard to really see what the story is in this dashboard without, sitting down and doing a lot of reading. And we wanted this to be very accessible to folks with just the high-level information for the purposes of that dashboard. And that was a process. It took about a year or so to get in agreed upon metrics across the programs. And we're still modifying that now. So once you build these visualizations that work for folks and you get, kind of an agreement on what the message should be, the second phase of this is leveraging data. Now, how do you get folks to start leveraging this? How do you make sure that the products that you build are being used to drive decision-making or to provide insight? So that's the third phase. And I want to show you guys some examples of how we've leveraged data, and in three areas. One is program improvement. The second one is for organizational management, so internally, how are we doing as an organization? And the last one is thought leadership, so how are we helping build the field in the community and helping others understand what's happening. So the first example is program improvement. And in this example, I show you something that one of our data users in our 2-on-1 program created. And she created this dashboard. This is one slide of many of her presentation that she created for a legislative member in San Francisco who was interested in understanding what was happening in the Tenderloin district. And so for many of you guys who are familiar with San Francisco and the Tenderloin, you know that there's a lot of homelessness out there. And not only that, but the demographics have been drastically changing in the recent years. So what they wanted to understand is kind of what are some of the key drivers and issue areas that they should be addressing in the Tenderloin. And she created this dashboard in Tableau where it breaks down kind of the top part is, I know it's pretty small for so many folks, but the top part is the different zip codes and what the breakdown of types of calls that people were calling for. So the baby blue is housing and shelter. So that was something that was big across all the zip codes, primarily for the 94017. And then the number of calls that the second bubble chart was the number of calls that were coming in across these different zip codes. The other interesting insight that came from this was that you see after 2010, this light blue line here is tax services. The baby blue line is housing and shelter. And after 2010, you start to see that housing and shelter surpass tax services. So what was happening there where housing and shelter became the biggest need in that area after that time. And so this helped really to build a conversation around it for the folks she was presenting to really understand. I mean, you get thousands and thousands of calls coming into 2-on-1, and, how do we begin to leverage this type of data to really get people to understand what's happening in that area, in different communities? I mean, it's a wealth of data out there. So she was able to leverage this to really drive conversation and steer some decision-making in that area. And then the other example I want to show you guys is how we use our opinion poll survey to really understand what's happening, how people view us, how people view United Way of the Bay Area. And this is a picture of me because I like it. It's me and some other staff member volunteering. So this is an example of our engagement opinion poll survey. This was the first year that we did it, and what we did is we leveraged data out inside of Salesforce to send out to a variety of partners who were engaged with us either through volunteering with us, they were a partner agency organization, they were just a community member who had signed up with a newsletter or something, or they're a donor. So we wanted to really understand how people view us. And I want to show you guys an example, kind of do a deep dive, if I may, of what this looked like. So here are some of the results of this survey that was put into Tableau StoryPoint. So traditionally, when you do a survey, a lot of us just do a static report, and we say, here's what the findings are, here's who we served, here's what the results are. One of the reasons why we wanted to use this StoryPoint dashboard is because it's interactive. So being able to present to folks, kind of how do people view us on these key roles? And not only that, how does it change by the type of involvement they have with us? So whether or not they're a donor or they're a partner agency, you can see they have higher opinions, or there's some other things here. How much do people trust United Way? So you can see kind of where we're at versus United Way as a whole. And then another interesting question was the Net Promoter Score that many organizations asked, who's likely to promote United Way of the Bay Area. And this shows donors. You can see so I'm clicking down on the right-hand side where there's filters, and you can see kind of, depending on their engagement level, how they view us. And the other interesting insight from this is that you can see the age groups. This is the 18 to 34, the millennials, but as you get older, the perceptions, the likelihood to promote starts to become, more on the negative side. So the millennials are our biggest promoters. So the reason why this was so important to put it in the story point is because folks could actually, as you're doing the presentation, folks can actually, ask questions, and you pre-fill it with these different filters so you can answer it right in front of their eyes. So it's just presented on all staff and with their leadership team, and, was able to make it interactive and engaging for folks so that they can begin to leverage this information to build better engagement strategies. And so let me go back to presentation. So the last example is the thought leadership. And the example I want to show you guys in here is our nonprofit pulse survey that we do in the Bay Area every year. We've been doing the survey since 2005, and basically we asked a bunch of nonprofits and social sector and agencies in the social sector about how they're faring each year. We saw some really interesting insights when the economic crisis happened, and how people recovered from how nonprofit agencies and the clients that they serve recovered after that moment. Traditionally, what we do with this survey is we put it in a report, we do an executive graphic summary, and we send out a press release, and that is it. We tell folks if you want it broken down by your county, you want to see the results by your county, we can send that to you separately. So, it was very static, it was very one-off. How we leveraged it this year, was doing another Tableau story point. And let me show you guys an example of that as well. So here's a live version that we posted on Tableau Public. And this is the same as a report. It looks like I clicked on something. Okay. This is the same kind of thing that we did in the graphic summary, but only it's interactive. So now we're putting the data in other people's hands to begin to use. So you can see the interactive maps down here, kind of who responded to the survey. You can see, if you click on any of these tabs, there are specific questions or issue areas. So demand for services, 74% said demand for services increased. But if you look at different counties, you can see all of this stuff changed. So kind of what are the areas where demand for service increased the most? In Alameda County, this filter is showing, their primary need was mental health care and affordable housing. In Contra Costa, it was technology and mental health care. San Francisco, unsurprisingly, affordable housing was a place where demand for services increased. So there's a lot of different questions in here, and people can use the filter and leverage it and build reports off of it and send images to whomever or to social media to really help folks understand how nonprofits are faring in that area and how the clients they serve are faring. Let's go back to the presentation. So now that you've gotten, once we built all of these different tools, we got folks to leverage them and to begin to use it to drive insight, that meant really just putting the data in their hands. The fourth and final stage I'm going to go through is building sustainability. So how do we keep this stuff going? How do we keep the momentum going? Not, like with some of these things that we built. I'll show you an example of the community data library. Some of the stuff needs to be updated on a regular basis. This pulls in, the community data library has all of these different metrics within the Bay Area, broken down by county, broken down by the Bay Area as a region, compared to California and compared to the U.S. Tons of metrics in here on unemployment, ethnicity, the percentage of the population that's living below poverty or living below self-sufficiency. So all of these different indicators that were important to how we tell the story of poverty in the Bay Area. But it needs to be updated. They're coming from a variety of different sources. How do we keep these up to date, keeping people using this information and within our organization and externally? Your visualizations are only as good as they are relevant. So how do we keep the momentum going? How do we keep people excited about that? That's something that we're still working on and still making sure that data becomes a regular part of the conversation in meetings. I know there's a lot of key buzzwords like big data, machine learning, predictive analysis, and a lot of these things die down and the new thing comes out. How do we make sure that things that are getting people across the organization and in the community to be champions of data aren't being lost, aren't being forgotten about when something else comes along? So that's an important thing, that building up sustainability is probably one of the most important things of getting visualizations used and to drive social impact. So there are some early outcomes that we've noticed in building these different visualizations and really kind of turning into this more data-driven organization at United Way of the Bay Area. And one of those early outcomes that we've seen is it created conversations around improvement. So in some places we noticed that data wasn't there, data was missing, or we weren't really understanding what the right true metrics were once we looked at the information, once we had that data accessible to staff members and to our leadership team. So it created conversations around where we needed to improve systems, where we need to improve the types of metrics we were looking at, or whether or not it was the right metric. The other early outcome is identifying issue areas and priorities. So like the 2-in-1 example I showed you guys of where calls were coming in, you saw that that really helped to identify some of the issue areas. People need housing. That's been a growing need since, right after the economic crisis, and people are still recovering from that. So kind of identifying issues that can be addressed, highlighting some of those things, and inspiring change, hopefully. The last big early outcome that we noticed was shared performance of activities and stakeholders. So we were able to communicate what was happening in our organization, share our impact. That's that transparency thing. For the first time, in some of those program dashboards, we had information in one place and one time. There was our workforce youth program. I remember coming in, and when we wanted to build a dashboard, we realized we didn't have all the data in one place, and that, it was in all these different forms and spreadsheets and things like that, to the point where we couldn't understand, how many people were being served throughout the entire life of the program. And so by building these visualizations and dashboards and building the systems behind it, we were able to finally present that message, finally present that outcome to folks and share that out externally and really talk about what was happening in the program. And lastly, the key takeaways I will leave you guys with before we open this up with some Q&A is that one of the most important things is really allowing time to build out some of these things. Now, using Tableau or any kind of business intelligence software you choose to use is not going to be your biggest issue. And in most cases with Tableau, it's super easy. People without a data background or an evaluation background or research background can actually leverage it pretty easily, pull their data in there and drag and drop and run these, build a visualization as good as I did or even better, pretty easily. But the thing that takes a lot of time is allowing time to work through, to clean your data, to work through some technical issues with your data systems, to get folks all on the same page with what the metrics are, or you might not be collecting it, so now you have to do a survey or go back and retroactively collect that data, or try to test out a bunch of different visualizations and with a bunch of different people across the organization until you find something that works. So that takes the longest amount of time. So before you promise someone, hey, I can get this great visualization out for this thing that we're doing, allow time for that. Allow time for iterations of your visualizations and to find that data that may not exist. And then leveraging others. This is that building an army of champions. The key thing to do in the beginning is getting folks excited and energized about using the data, asking them, what's important for them to see, how they would leverage the data, kind of getting them involved in the process, that you're building things that would actually be used, and that you have people wanting to use and leverage the data themselves. So maybe that means setting up things for folks so that they can draw their own insights, setting up a dashboard, putting filters in there so they can come to their own conclusions and ask questions and really push that information out. And then the other third key takeaway of this is designing smart. So building things that are usable, easy to access, easy to understand, there's clarity. Even within our one organization, there are certain definitions of things of key things within each program that you may not understand unless you're on that team. So, making sure that these dashboards can be used by everyone and not, or by most folks, and not just, a set of people, a small set of folks that really understand what's happening. So really just making them non-techy, I guess. And so with that, I conclude it, and I will open this up to some Q&A, some questions you guys might have.
Cynthia, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so the first question, there's a few questions about the type of ingesting of data, tools that you use to pull that data into Tableau. Can you go into some detail and how you ingested that data into Tableau?
You're breaking up just a tad bit, Tim. Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. There seems to be a little bit of background noise on yours. Can you mute yours while I ask questions, perhaps? Any of the background noise? Can you mute your phone?
Okay.
Yeah, much better. Sorry, there's a little bit of background noise. I'm not sure where it's coming from. But the first question that have been asked by a few that are attending is wanting more detail about the types of tools that you're using to ingest that data and make it into the presentation that you're doing here, usually using Tableau. If you can go into detail about how you are integrating and the different tools used for that data.
So yeah, we don't use any high-tech or fancy tools. So we're just kind of getting started. In the last few years, we've really just migrated our goal to really being data-driven using these types of insights and visualizations. So some of the tools that we use are pretty simple, pretty non-complex, including just taking things like, I think Tableau has been really instrumental for us because it's pretty easy to use. There's no back-end work you have to do. But taking or databases like Salesforce, where we store a lot of our engagement information in, and efforts to outcome, it's a database for collecting social service data, and plugging that in and kind of just streamlining that into Tableau to build some of these things. And I think that is the biggest thing for us in building just that is the most popular tool that we use in just building these visualizations. A lot of it does have to be manual because, like I said, we are kind of migrating this goal, which means going from Excel spreadsheets to more complex databases that allow you to do reporting. And so I hope that answers your questions. It's mostly just kind of creating either a manual import or whatever Tableau allows you to connect to directly so you can have a live connection.
Very good, India. The next question is, you had stated that you share the data with some of your partners. I think you said something like you put it in their hands. How does United Way Bay Area deal with sort of the interpretation of the data? Because obviously what we're talking about here is data telling a story at the end of the day, and that story can be told in multiple ways and can be interpreted differently. How does United Way, when you're sharing the data, make sure that the message you want sent out there is telling that story?
That is a really good question and something that we talk about a lot at the organization because it's one thing to, create something and get it out there and hope that people interpret the information and use it, but it's another thing, how they actually interpret it and use the information. So one of the best practices, tips, things that I have done is I've really just tested out anything that I'm producing, and I encourage others to do that as well. I test it out with a couple of folks across the organization and kind of understand, kind of get some feedback from them on what their interpretation is of that information. And if it's something that's not in line with what the data is actually telling, I make sure that I make that clear. So specifically speaking of something done in Tableau, there's a way you can create kind of a data dictionary in another tab that explains what each of these metrics mean when they were pulled, or you can create like these like a hover above tooltip that explains what the metrics are, and you can also put text in there. So sometimes you might think that the data is pretty straightforward until you hear someone else's interpretation of it, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not exactly what that means. And so just really testing out things a few times internally with different folks across the organization, figuring out what their interpretation is if you're going to release something externally, and making sure you're really clear on what the key message is. Don't assume that everyone can see, a metric and get the same interpretation as you. Just making sure that that is super easy to understand, that it is clear, that your titles are right and very accurate, and any additional detail, is put in an asterisk or something. And that's part of just building out your visualizations right. If you build them out right and they're clear, then, anyone should be able to take that and really understand it. Now, if they choose to, put a spin on it, that's kind of something that's beyond your control.
Okay, very thoughtful response to that question, and it is an issue I think a lot of people do deal with. Again, there's been a few questions centered around what tools you're using specifically in Tableau, desktop, server, online, or public, to utilize the demonstration and the storytelling of this data. And they're also asking how long did it take to really build it out. So when you guys went and started to tackle this project, you talked about the buy-in and all that kind of stuff. Can you provide more detail about the tools you're using specifically at Tableau that works with your organization, the build-out of that, and then the buy-in is from start to finish?
Yeah, they're two really good questions. We did test out what people were most likely to use as far as the different tools in Tableau. So for some of you guys that are familiar with Tableau, you know that there's a desktop license, a server license, which allows you to access it from anywhere, access your data and build them from anywhere. There's the online, and there is the Tableau Public, which makes it accessible to the general public. That's the post survey that I showed you guys that was posted in Tableau Public, so anyone can access that and play with it and export images. So what we found is that we got a core group of folks across the organization, a desktop and server license. And these are the folks that are responsible within their given departments for building metrics and collecting the data. They're responsible for their data in their department. And so those are the folks that are, kind of sharing out images with their teams, with their departments across the organization. So we realized that was kind of the key to doing it. That was a key thing for us, getting that core group of data visualization builders licensed to really edit and create these things. The other thing that we did is got folks across the organization reader licenses, which are free, which allow people to really just manipulate whatever you want them to manipulate. So like those filters I showed you guys, they can play with those. They can't create things, but they can play with those. And then we have mid-level users, and for those users, they might want to drag and drop a few things on the go. So those are the ones that have the server online license. And they won't be doing any huge deep dive analysis or really kind of focused on the insights as much as the core group of data users who have the desktop license, but they might want to answer their own questions and be able to drag and drop. So it has minimal use for creating charts and graphs, but it allows them that power to be able to do that. And then the reader is just for folks primarily like their leadership team and people who just want to see the insights and be able to share that out. So those are the different things that we do. And then for the community at large, we use the public. So those are different tools that we leverage. And we found that to be a really good strategy for us, and it has worked for us. But, if anything changes, we might migrate to getting a few more desktop licenses. And then your second question was, how did we get buy-in? That's a difficult thing. I mean, it's a really good question. It's a difficult thing. How do you get people to actually start, engaging in Tableau? One of the things, we've been using it for about 2.5 years at United Way, and I think it really just kind of develops buy-in once you create something that's meaningful. So that's why I said in those different phases, you have the data champions, but you have some visualizations and some insights that you're then sharing out. Once we did that, people were excited about leveraging it for different things, and the possibilities were endless. So once we started creating, just kind of putting some things out there, like here's this dashboard, here, we allow you to see all these different outcomes across years and across counties, we got a lot of buy-in that way, and people started, thinking about other ways they can begin to leverage the data. So just really putting that in, putting out something, getting things out, start sharing your outcomes in that way to folks, making it more visual, making it easy for people to understand, and then I think naturally folks will really buy into the idea of, looking at these dashboards and doing insights. Your organization will buy into the idea of getting licenses for this or for any other business intelligence product.
A great answer again, India. Very thoughtfully responded to. I think a question might be, while you provided a great outline of how you got the buy-in and the process, on the buy-in side, did you get pushback from any departments where, United Way has been around for a long time? They're set in their ways, I would imagine, to a certain degree, and this is something new, right? So you're introducing something that's going to provide better insight, but along the way, how did you deal with, or did you have to at all, deal with people saying, yeah, we like the way it is?
That's a good question. I can see how that would be an issue. I think for us, for United Way of the Bay Area, I think people are really inspired about this next step, this next phase that we're in. People are really driven by doing kind of really insightful thinking, using data and metrics. I know our CEO likes to describe United Way of the Bay Area as a 90-year-old startup, in that people are really interested in being innovative, and a lot of that innovation comes with understanding what's happening, what's working, and what could work in the future, so that, predictive analysis, that descriptive analysis, and so I think people are naturally really excited about data. I did not have to really promote very much of myself or the use of data and information very much, because there is that momentum here, and I think a lot of agencies in the social sector are also having a lot of that momentum. You might be coming from an organization that might be more set in their ways, but I think it's taking over. It's really taking over the social sector rapidly, so I wouldn't be surprised if that changes. There's a lot of, social sector organizations using big data now, which is really exciting. So I don't think there's going to be much need for persuading folks to, use data and visualization to not only drive decisions, but to really showcase work.
Okay, very good. A question that came in that I think is interesting is, while we're discussing, obviously, United Way, and most of that know it as this very large global organization. But it sounds like United Way Bay Area is a smaller subset of that larger group. So the question that came in is, what would you recommend for smaller organizations? But maybe you can discuss how this portion, that United Way Bay Area, if you would consider yourself a smaller organization, and how do you sort of filter everything up into the larger global United Way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are kind of mid-sized when it comes to a nonprofit organization. We have about 100 plus, nearly 100 plus employees here. So we're not huge, and we don't really have a huge data team. Like I mentioned before, our Department of Evaluation and Insight is me. And we have data users across the organization. I think that it becomes even more crucial and important to have a tool like Tableau or something, whatever works for your organization, because it allows you to do quick insights. That was something that really kind of drove my desire to use Tableau, because as the person responsible for all things data related, I had a lot on my plate. I had a lot of, there were a lot of possibilities for our organization, ways we could be leveraging it, but not enough time to really do that, and not enough time to, do it all on my own. So the ability to use something like that, and just to be able to share out, like connect the data, for example, and just share it out with someone else to, play with it and really draw their own insights became crucial. In order for us to really become a data-driven organization, it can't be just me. And in addition to that, you really need the right tools. Whatever tools work for you guys, whatever tools work for the systems that you have. I like Tableau because they're a pretty popular system, and which means that they're working with a lot of the databases that we work with, such as Salesforce, or connecting to Access, or I think there's a back-end connection, an ODBC connection you can make into ETO to pull the data, Google Analytics. So they're working with a lot of these top databases. So it was easy for us to be able to make that direct connection and to be able to draw insights quickly. A different type of tool might have taken us more time. So, but it isn't cheap. It isn't cheap to use some of these systems, and maybe you just start with one or two and don't do, the full licenses, but figure out a way that you can have like one or two folks really sharing out that information to other folks to really kind of just play with filters and the interactive activities to draw insights. I think it's worth it. I really can't imagine not having a tool like this to be able to do quick insights. It would take me a heck of a long time to do all the things that I do in the amount of time I have to do it. So I think it's especially important for small organizations with limited resources.
Very good. Connected to that question, some have been asking how many users you have and how many people within the United Way Bay Area might be doing something similar to what you're doing, or even maybe outside of the Bay Area, the other regional office that you might be connected to. So maybe you can speak to sort of the overall licensing, seats that you've been needing and how you've managed to sort of scale Tableau based on your data needs.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have kind of three types of users at United Way. The first one is those deep dive users, the ones that are actually creating the deep insights, creating the charts and graphs, building the visualizations. I think it's about five folks maybe that have those licenses, desktop licenses, and they're represented all across the organization. And then we have some server licenses, that's about 10 or so more, and that's with kind of high users, but not necessarily folks who create the, where data is in their job responsibilities, but they might be using data a lot for, going to engage with partners. And then we have the third type of user is the folks that just simply want the information. They're not going to be creating any drag and drop features, but they might want to have that information for whatever conversations they're having. So those are the ones that have a Tableau reader, which are free licenses, and we try to make sure that most folks in the organization have that. So that's been a useful strategy for us right now where we're at, and we might want to revisit that at some point, but it's worked for us. And then just kind of as the United Way as a network as a whole, this is kind of spreading like wildfire across the United Ways. I just had a few conversations with some other folks at United Way Worldwide, United Way of California, United Way of Utah, all these other United Ways that are starting to really leverage Tableau as a business intelligence tool that they use to draw insights and to build things like interactive dashboards to really share the story and communicate data and metrics in the community. So it's really something that's spreading across the United Ways as a whole, across social sectors, I think, as a whole. So it's pretty exciting to be at the beginning stages of it.
Very good. Sounds like you're starting a United Way trend. So good for you for being the pioneer. The next question is, how often do you update or change the standard metrics that you're collecting? And I guess this sort of goes also to the different types of data you're collecting and how often that data is updated and then shared with those that need to see the data.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mentioned the point in my presentation that, the data is only as useful as it is relevant. As a really fast-paced, fast-moving nonprofit, our metrics or outcomes or goals are shifting with, with the issues and the priority areas in our communities. So that means also that the metrics are shifting sometimes, and that can be frustrating when you've spent a long time building out, different visualizations to communicate one thing, and then, we find out that may not be the most important outcome of a program, so the metrics might change, or the priority areas, we learn something new about our population and we shift our priority areas. So that shifts a lot. It changes a lot, and that's one of the reasons why working together, working with folks across your organization is crucial. Because if you build a visualization, a dashboard that's no longer relevant to the metrics that are being tracked, then you just spend a ton of time that's, not useful. It's not providing very much insight. So you have to make that communication very constant. You have to make that process very collaborative with the program teams or, with the different departments so that you constantly understand what the key metrics are and you're flexible to change. It changes a lot for us, and you just kind of have to roll with it and build out the right messaging around some of those things and help folks to really understand what those metrics are early on.
Okay, very good. That's going to have to be the last question. We're at the end of our presentation. So everybody that did ask questions, we had a lot that came in. Don't worry, rest assured, I'm going to be sending them to India and to Tableau and making sure that you guys get a response. Also, the screen that's been up for a while, you can take down India's information and reach out to her after this presentation if you'd like. So again, thank you, India. Great presentation, very thoughtful answers to some really great questions. I just have a really few quick announcements to make to please mark your calendars for January 9th and our next Data Science Central webinar, which is going to be sponsored by Altascale. And also, as I mentioned earlier today, this taping is going to be made available later on this afternoon on datasciencecentral.com. This brings our webinar to a close. This is the final webinar for the year, so thank you for everyone that's been participating and attending. I'd like to thank our audience again for their participation and questions, and a special thank you to Tableau and to India for their sponsorship and to India for her insight into today's topic. My name is Tim Madison. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I'll look forward to seeing you all again on January 9th. Happy holidays and Happy New Year to you all, and we'll see you next time. Take care.